Hey, what's up, gamers? Today we're going to be taking, I don't know why it's so funny. Today we're going to be taking a look at Soulframe. I've been playing the game recently and can now finally talk about it. Last week they lifted the NDA for Preludes, which is what they are calling their ongoing pre-alpha testing. I spent the past few days playing the game, checking out the latest build, which is clearly a work in progress. In fact, I wouldn't even call this much of a game at the moment. Rather, they have laid the foundation with some of the major systems and features and are letting us play around with that core loop, but it definitely does not feel anywhere remotely close to a complete video game. Clearly still has a way to go, but of course it does. It's pre-alpha after all, but nevertheless, I played it, I can talk about it, recorded a bunch of footage. So let's dive into it. What is Soulframe and what do I think of it so far? So this is a third-person fantasy action combat game. You're going to go around fighting enemies, completing events, solving puzzles, and collecting loot. It blends the progression systems of traditional RPGs with skill trees, stats, and stuff like that, with a heavy touch of Warframe as well with its crafting and building systems. And all of this is set in a world where nature has been corrupted by this evil force whom we are here to fight back. The game is divided into two primary sections, let's call them. There is the top level, which is an open world made up of static points of interest, and then there is what's called the Undercity, which are these ever-changing subterranean procedural dungeons. Now, pretty much straight away after a brief tutorial, the game has you bouncing between these two areas. You'll spend some time moving around the open world, visiting the points of interest, fighting the groups of enemies, collecting loot, and doing some objectives, after which you'll be directed to one of several underground dungeons. You'll move through those various hallways and rooms, clearing the enemies there, solving the occasional puzzle, and collecting loot, and then eventually you'll find your way to the exit, emerging back into the open world. Rinse and repeat. You're going to do this over and over and over again, with your primary motivation being power progression. You are doing these aforementioned activities that will be granting you experience, leveling up your character, progressing your class, leveling your weapons, while also accumulating the resources and currency needed to craft new weapons and armor. The combat system here is action, and as you can clearly see, there's a heavy emphasis on melee, but the game does also include ranged attacks and spells. So you've got basic light and heavy attacks with some short combo chains that you can do. There is a dodge and a parry with perfect timing options and counter attacks to follow. You can even throw your weapon and then God of War style recall it back to your hands, or if you want, after tossing it out, you're free to go fisticuffs for a little bit, which can be kind of funny. I will add as well that the weapon throw feels really good. I ended up using it pretty heavily while playing the game. There are some contextual attacks in here as well. For example, you can backstab when behind an enemy. You have a lunging attack that you can do following a dash, and there's even a falling heavy attack variation, which sort of does a slam, but doesn't really slam. It's still some missing animations in here, I believe. And then finally, you've got your spells and abilities. So there are multiple classes in the game. They're actually referred to as packs. You select a pack that you want to play, and that basically determines your playstyle, your class. Every one of these packs come with 3 default abilities. Now, eventually there are going to be tons of packs, probably similar to Warframe, but right now there are just a handful. Now, the abilities for the class that I played, which was the Ode Tempest pack, include Sizemore, which is this fiery bowling ball that will damage and push back enemies in a line. Then there was Astra Sphere, which places a sphere on the ground that deals electrical damage within a radius. And then Atmos Sphere, which is a defensive ability that absorbs incoming attacks. Now, not surprisingly, melee combat in this game feels a heck of a lot like it does in Warframe. Very, very similar. Maybe it has a little more impact to it, a little more oomph, but not a ton, frankly. In fact, the whole thing still feels rather stiff all around, and enemies could use a bit more hit react for sure. I mean, half the time it feels like I'm swinging my weapon at the air, because even if it connects, the enemy barely responds to being struck. It does not feel very good. I would say that the combat feeling rather lacking is one of my biggest early points of feedback. This is something that I really want them to continue to focus on. I am hoping and assuming that they will continue to work on this going forward, because after all, it is still just pre-alpha, and yeah, combat needs quite a bit more love in my opinion. The enemies that you're going to be fighting against consist of a mix of basic ranged and melee options. There's melee, including these basic grunts that wield a variety of close ranged weapons, and then there are ranged variants using things like bows. You even got some magic casters in here as well. There are these enemy dogs, although you don't actually kill these ones, animals, rather they run away when you remove their head covering, which is a nice little touch because the whole game is kind of like you're friends with the animals. You're trying to restore nature and bring a balance and everything. So we're not killing the dogs, we're killing the evil things corrupting and capturing the dogs. There's also various, I guess I'll call them elites. These are larger enemies. Oftentimes they'll be wielding a big two-handed weapon or a one-handed and shield, and they get their own special health bar that appears at the top of the screen whenever you're near one of them. There's also a couple, I think 1 or 2 bosses that are tied to the main story quest, but that all wraps up pretty quickly. So you're fighting these enemies in the previously mentioned like 2 main sections of the game, the open world and the dungeons. So the upper level of what is the open world currently consists of a small portion. It's about like a fifth of this island that they're building out. And the whole thing is rather hilly. It's got patches of wooded areas. There are lakes and rivers. There are some caves and other natural terrain in the environment, all of which is also then punctuated by multiple points of interest. These include towns and villages, castles and towers, and many of these tiny little enemy camps with these little huts all throughout. Sometimes they're around a campfire or around one of these oil wells called moaners. But yeah, you got enemy camps scattered all throughout and then these major points of interest. Now, while you are in the open world, you're certainly free to just roam around doing whatever you want. You'll kill the enemies that you see. You'll break open crates and barrels to get some money. You'll open chests for loot and resources. You might rescue some captured animals and collect a handful of what are harvestable resources found in the environment. At the same time, though, you will be constantly receiving these patrol quests. I don't actually know what they're technically called. At one point, I see them referred to as the Sparrow Tails, but whatever they're called, these quests are asking you to complete one of many different objectives for reward. And these include some basic tasks like clearing a camp of enemies, destroying those oil drilling or spawning moaners, slaying some sort of a roaming mini boss, or intercepting a patrol of enemies. And then there's also more elaborate ones like the Hark the Collector quest, where this spaceship actually descends from the sky, bringing with it a lightning storm. Going to that location will then start a chain of events. First, you fight off a couple of waves of enemies that are summoned in, and then it culminates with a boss fight against Nimrod, the electric-infused boss that we saw in previews. This is the most elaborate of these events that I've seen in my time with the game so far, and I hope that there are more of them that they add in the future, because this is actually quite interesting. Now, many of these patrols will have you doing stuff in that open world area, but then oftentimes they will also bring you into the dungeons. Dungeons in Soulframe function a lot like they do in their Warframe equivalent. The different dungeons will consist of a set of potential building blocks, and then those blocks are procedurally placed together so that no 2 runs are exactly alike. Now, these building blocks range from consisting of small connecting hallways and corridors to massively large open spaces, some with a ton of verticality, and then everything in between. Now, one of the interesting things that I've noticed here is that many of these building block rooms, especially the larger ones, will actually have several potential entrance and exit points, so that on any given run, you might find another area that's open to explore that was closed off previously at several different branching parts of a single room. It's not just like there are rooms with 1 entrance and 1 exit, and then it's connected to a hallway, and then another room with 1 entrance and 1 exit. A lot of these rooms will have several potential entrance and exit points, and the way they combine these and put these together, I think they do a really good job of it. And as I mentioned, some of these rooms can be quite vertical. There are many of them that have like multiple levels and layers that extend up quite high and low. Each of those levels within those individual rooms, again, can also have their own potential connecting paths on them as well. Now, after a couple of days, I've definitely started to get to know the rooms. I'll know sort of where some of the hidden chests might be found, some of the potential entrance and exit points, the event locations, etc. But I will say that this is one of the better implementations of a procedural dungeon layout that I've seen in a game that uses this kind of a system. There's already quite a lot of depth and variety in here, and I presume that's just going to get even better with time. Yeah, they've just done a pretty good job here with how they've implemented procedural dungeons. So you can go into these dungeons on your own accord. Once you found the entrance, you're free to keep running it over and over again, going through, leaving, and then going back in. If you want, you can do that. But as mentioned, other times you're going to have one of those Sparrow quests that direct you to a specific dungeon, and then once inside, you're going to have some similar objective, either to complete a task or to kill some group or combination of enemies. Then there's also, in these dungeons in particular, quite a lot of puzzles and secrets and hidden areas. Now, I've mostly found the puzzles in the dungeons, although some of them have been in the open world. You've got things like push and pull puzzles, where you're going to move one piece and then multiple other pieces move at the same time. You need to figure out the proper order so that they all line up in a proper combination. Or there's sunlight redirecting puzzles, where you follow a light beam from the ceiling and then have to move or break objects that are in the beam's path to connect it, reflecting off of a set of mirrors. There are hidden levers that, once found, will lift debris or raise platforms. There are statues that are fallen over. You need to knock them back into place. You have to destroy the oil well things called moaners, which will clear corruption. And in all of these instances that I just mentioned, solving the puzzle will grant access to a hidden treasure room. Sometimes these will be full of multiple loot chests, and loot chests are like the main thing you're going after because it's tied directly into your progression of crafting. And then there's other sort of secrets and events. Like I found in one dungeon a statue event where I interacted with these deer statues. It lowered, and then there was just continuous waves of enemies spawning in. In one area, I found this large container that was holding some water, and interacting with that pool revealed some area of the island where I'm assuming there's a secret if I happen to find it. And then also in a lot of the dungeons, you're gonna hear this sort of whispering at certain points, and if you hear that kind of a whispery chattering in the background, if you pull up your pact ability, it then reveals this fire spirit that you can sort of suck his soul in, and it gives you access temporarily to this super powerful fire imbued sword that you can use. Looks like they're also going to have a variety of mini games. The one that I've seen so far, I found at Avocot, that little sproutling creature, and he had this game called Regatta. So you have to move your 4 pieces from one end of a game board all the way to the other end. You flip a pile of coins, and then you get to move a piece 1 space for every number of those coins that are face up. If you land on an opponent's piece, it will reset them back to 0, and vice versa if your piece gets landed on. And then the first player to get all 4 pieces to the finish line wins. It's just a little mini game, but it's a nice touch for sure, right? There are 4 main NPCs in the game currently. These are referred to as the Ancestors. There's Orlick, who is like a historian. He will track and catalog things you've unlocked, including locations, other ancestors, quests, and notes. Then there is the Blacksmith, where you go to craft new weapons and armor. There is Vermina, who is all about cosmetics. You can change the color dyes of your armor here. And then there is Fen Jotar, and he is like the moat master. He's that fire guy that you find in dungeons. In your camp, he lets you place moats, which are enhancements into your weapons and pact. So you're going to actually find and rescue each one of these ancestors out in the world. The first one that you do, the historian Orlick, is part of the early portion of the main story quest line. The other ones you have to find on your own accord. Mostly though, it's just completing a short quest that typically has you returning some personal item to their spirit that then unlocks them for you to use back at your home base. And really, this whole system and how they introduce you to the NPCs is actually really neat. Also, love the NPCs, lots of personality and great voice acting here. This was something I was really impressed with. Now, in terms of progression in the game, there's a few parts. So there are the weapons that you use, those can be leveled up, getting stronger as they go. And then there are also weapon skill trees called the combat arts. So for every class of weapon, for example, sword and shield, or pole arms, or long swords, or short swords, every class will have its own progression skill tree. There are also passive stats called virtues for your character, and these include enhancing your courage, your spirit, and your grace. Then there is the classes or the pacts. Those come with 3 abilities that you unlock as you level the pact. But then also as you level, there is a skill tree with further enhancements within it. And then finally, there is the crafting system. The game has multiple pieces of armor and weapons for you to craft. So first what happens is you have to discover the fragments for a piece of gear. This is for both weapons and armor. Once you have all of the fragments, you then just need some resources, materials, and gold in order to craft it. So the materials and gold are found simply by playing the game, although it seems like the most valuable source seems to be from opening loot chest and from completing those patrol quests. Once you have all of the required items, you can then craft the weapon and armor. You do this at the blacksmith in your base, and it's basically exactly like Warframe. You take all the materials, you put them together, and then you have a build timer. This seems to range anywhere from 2 to 10 hours in most cases, but there was one piece of gear that I have that takes up to 24 hours of crafting time, and this is real world crafting time, by the way. So if you start a 24-hour build, return the next day at the same time, that's when it's going to be available. Now, like in Warframe, Warframe, this will no doubt be one of the main ways they are monetizing the game. It's going to be free to play. They're going to give you ways to pay to skip these timers. There will also be means in the game to skip those timers. It's just depending on how you approach it. And really, depending on who you ask, Warframe either has some of the best or worst free to play monetization in this genre. So it's a matter of perspective, right? Whether it's a good or a bad system. But yeah, that's what they're going with. Crafting with long build timers and lots of components for you to collect. All right, so currently, the gameplay loop of playing Soulframe, it basically looks like this. You start with the basic tutorial, and then there's a chain of like a handful of main story quests. This is how they introduce you to the open world, the dungeons, and to unlocking the ancestors. Now, once you finish that chain, which doesn't take very long, I want to say it was like at most like 2 hours or so. At that point, what you're going to be doing is wandering around the open world. You'll kill the enemies you see. You'll collect loot and open chests. You're going to get a patrol quest that pops up, one of those sparrow quest. You follow the bird to the location, you complete the objective that it asks, and then once that's done, you get your reward. You move around for a bit more, doing some killing and looting, and then within like 1 or 2 minutes, a new patrol quest pops up again. Rinse and repeat. Now this has you going either through the open world or into the dungeons. Wherever you are, your primary thing is you're looking for loot, you want currency, you want resources. That's going to give you what you need to engage with the crafting, to get access to new weapons, to new pieces of gear. Although right now I should note, I don't think the gear has any stats, or if it does, it's not surfaced to you. All the gear just looks visually different and comes with some flavor text, but I've not seen anything about enhancing my character or set bonuses or anything like that. Maybe it changes in the future, but for the current build, that's how it is. So you're doing that entire gameplay loop. You're looking for the currency and the resources. You're doing the crafting to try new weapons, to get different looking gear. And then also while you're doing that in the process, you're going to be leveling up the various progression routes, leveling up your weapon, leveling up your pact or class, and leveling up your character to enhance the stats. Then also in the ones that have them, progressing through these skill trees, unlocking nodes when available. And that is the game as of currently. Let's move into the pros and cons, what I like and what needs improvement. Things I like: the world and the concept. I love the setting. I love the nature-y vibes that they're going with, where we're rescuing animals. We're not killing the dogs, but we're setting them free. We're fighting back this evil force. The setting, the look of everything is really great. Speaking of which, visually, the lighting, the environment, the effects, I think all of this looks fantastic as well. I really like all of the puzzles and the hidden areas, the secret rooms, and how they're trying to keep things a little bit mysterious. I think the spell system is neat, and I'm excited to see how much variety they have with packs in this game. If it's anything like Warframe, we should expect quite a lot of these. The NPCs, the ancestors, I love these as well. Lots of character, great voice acting. I'd say my favorites so far are definitely Verminia, the blacksmith, as well as the little sprout creature. They're just all really well done. Lots of character, lots of personality here. And then again, it's got that progression system with those heavy Warframe roots, which, you know, you either love it or you hate it, depending on who you ask. Now, as for points of feedback, as mentioned, the combat, it just still needs quite a bit of work. It feels very floaty, really lacks impact. Enemies barely react to being struck half the time. Don't love that. They need to keep making this better. Also, in terms of combat, it is just incredibly easy, like face roll difficulty. If you've been watching the footage, you might have caught wind of that. There's almost zero challenge in this game. I think over the course of playing for 3 days, I might have died 2 times, most, maybe even only 1 time. Like, there's just no challenge whatsoever. And I hope that's something that they add in the future. Speaking of adding more content across the board, both in the amount of content, like the amount of explorable space and the number of dungeons, but also in the variety of content. I'd love to see a lot more variety. Again, pre-alpha, all of this is expected to be coming, but I'm just nevertheless giving my current points of feedback. Would also love to see some more movement options. Right now, you're just running. I'm not talking about like going to Warframe levels of like sliding at full speed, double jumping, twirling through the air, time slowing, moving. Like, no. Just some more movement with things like mantling, because right now you can't even lift yourself up over anything that's like above waist height. You're gonna have to walk around in most cases. So even something just like being able to mantle your character, being able to pull yourself up onto ledges would be really, really nice. Just some more options here. There is very little in the game at the moment, and I pretty much exhausted the Soulframe's content after just a few days. Now I could keep on grinding in order to unlock some more armor and different weapons, but there's really not much reason to do so. I've maxed out my character, I've maxed out my pact, I've maxed out the weapons that I'm using, and there doesn't appear to be any difficult or like pinnacle content for me to work towards. I may have missed something, I don't know, but more so really is the fact that because the game is so early on, I'm really not interested in burning myself out on such a content incomplete version of the game. I do quite like what I played. It still definitely has a ways to go. We need more overworld, we need more open world variety, we need more space to explore, some more dungeons, of course, more content variety in general, and really want more difficulty here. All of that is absolutely needed, but as a baseline, I did like what I've played. So it still definitely has a ways to go before it feels like a fleshed out video game, but the core foundation, the systems and features, and the basic loop that they've introduced here and that I got to play in Preludes, I think it's pretty good. I want them to finish up combat. I want them to do all the things that I recommended, but as a foundation, I'm hopeful. I am really hopeful for Soulframe's future. That does it for our look at Soulframe Preludes, this pre-alpha version of the game. Again, nice foundation, needs a lot more work, but I think they're moving in a good direction. Make combat better, please. Number one priority. That's it for today, though. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll keep you up to date in the future once any major updates and improvements come to the game, but that's it for today. Thanks as always. See you all next time.